Now I gotta start this video out by simply saying that was a fantastic episode and some truly great Star Wars all around. The show had been good, but I had been waiting for it to do something that really wowed me and totally grabbed my interest, and that is exactly what this one just did. And since we're essentially out of trailer and commercial footage other than those shots of Thrawn, we don't really know where the story is going or what is about to happen next, which is very exciting. It's nice to go into the back half of the season kind of blind, if you will. Though before we dig into the episode itself, I do have one sort of minor-ish complaint because, of course, I have to have at least one, right? And it wasn't even about the episode itself as much as I think things could have been tightened up a little bit to get us to this point quicker. I think the first two episodes should have been combined and edited down into one episode, and that this episode, and the previous one, episode 3, they should have been merged to form the second episode overall. And I just can't help but feel like Filoni is somehow stuck in a Clone Wars mentality, where he feels the need to tell chunks of a story in these rather small bursts or windows, like how Clone Wars often had 4-episode story arcs where each part was a little over 20 minutes long, and that when combined formed to make something akin to a mini-movie. And sure, you could say that this pays tribute to that style, that this feels like Clone Wars or Rebels, and that's what it should feel like. You could also say that in hindsight it all worked out, and the first few episodes culminated into something that was really spectacular. But I really think something needed to hook viewers a little earlier, especially since so much of what happened in the first half of the season could fairly easily be pieced together from what we saw in the trailers. And since, yeah, a lot of viewers out there have, of course, never seen Clone Wars and could easily think these episodes are just too short. Either way, patience with the series paid off in a big way with this episode, because again, it was terrific, and it even dealt with one of the core themes of Star Wars, that being selfish versus selfless. We were again reminded why Jedi, not that Sabine is one, but we were reminded why they do not allow themselves attachment, which is so that when push comes to shove, when the fate of the galaxy may very well be on the line, they make the right choice, the choice for the greater good, not just to try and save someone they care about. And I'm kind of happy to say that Sabine did not make the right choice here. She picked her friend Ezra over keeping Thrawn lost in another galaxy, and I wasn't exactly sure she would, which I liked and appreciated. I mean, yeah, they did kind of set it up or telegraph it early in the episode with Ahsoka kind of questioning her a bit and her motives, but I still could have seen that going either way, and I think both choices would have felt believable for Sabine. She tries to always do right, but also cares a great deal about her friends, or those who essentially she sees as family, which Ezra is among them. And again here, this is what Star Wars is all about. Characters making choices in the moment that have huge consequences beyond just the self. And I loved that about this episode. I love that Filoni can oftentimes just kind of tap down into what makes Star Wars Star Wars. Those themes and ideas that George Lucas put in place for us to all kind of relate to. Not that we can relate to having to make a choice that either condemns a friend or the galaxy to war, but we all do indeed have the big tough choices in life that may end up hurting those we care about. I'm also very happy that I was wrong about there being this sort of eureka moment where Sabine just figured out how to use the Force. Now sure, that may still happen, and probably will, but I thought for sure what we've seen in the trailer when Shin says to her, "You have no power," that would be the moment she unlocked cheat mode and just let the Force flow through her, and then took Shin down with ease. Instead, she reverted back to some Mandalorian tactics, which I thought was great. It was nice to kind of be reminded that, yeah, she is indeed one of their kind. We also got reminded later on when Baylan talks about what happened to her people. Though I couldn't help but chuckle a bit when she got force pushed back into the tree and her helmet just kind of popped off, mainly because I envisioned something like that happening to Din Djarin and how pissed off he'd be. But anyway, along with Sabine's decision, I loved that Baylan kept his word, that he stopped Shin from killing her and that Shin almost didn't want to follow her master's instructions. I love how she's just a bit off-kilter, as I'm more and more enjoying Baylan, this fallen Jedi who still keeps to some of the remnants of their ways. It's borderline gray Jedi stuff, sure, but so far it's done in a way that's interesting and is working for me. And he at least thinks he has a noble purpose or cause. He thinks he's doing what he must for the betterment of the galaxy, trying to secure its future is what he says, which seems to be helping to destroy the New Republic by bringing Thrawn back to reform the Empire. And I do hope we get a bit more about why he thinks that's the right course of action, other than, yeah, the New Republic looking pretty incompetent at every turn. And I want to know more about what is truly motivating him personally. But for now, I'm on board with what they're doing with him. It's been very well done, and it just all makes the passing of Ray Stevenson even sadder, especially because he was excited to see fan reaction to this character. It is just an absolute tragedy to have lost him. But moving on, something else that I thought was well done in this episode were all the lightsaber fights, and there were plenty of them. I especially enjoyed the one between Baylan and Ahsoka. Thought it was great to see them shifting stances and forms, and the strategy they were using against each other. The strategy used by these two old school Jedi who have been trained in the more classic arts. It was very prequel-esque, though I also like the ferocity of Baylan when he wanted to unleash it. His tendency to do these very powerful and deliberate moves very much reminds me of Darth Vader, though not in the suit. Next thing I gotta bring up then is Marok, who, turned out to be just Marok. Or what I'm assuming was a former Inquisitor who was killed at some point and animated by Morgan Elsbeth. Or maybe someone else she threw into old Inquisitor armor, which would then explain why he was wearing a mask. It wasn't to keep a super secret identity, it was to hide the animated carcass underneath. And I've already seen some people kind of mad about this, saying Filoni misled us or something like that. But I think at least he thought he had a cool idea or concept for a character, and that it was an interesting way to introduce people to more Night Sister magic, especially those completely unfamiliar with them, which again, a lot of people have never seen Clone Wars and aren't going to be ready for animating the dead in Star Wars, which Night Sisters can and have done. Anyway, I really don't think Filoni was trying to dupe us or get us chasing our tails with theories as much as he thought people would think it was pretty cool to see what Morgan had done to this poor and unfortunate soul. Which, at least, I thought it was. I was never on board with any of the Marok theories, and as I've said before, I always try to keep in mind that not everything that's not immediately obvious to us is meant to be a big mystery that needs to be solved, and not every little detail we come across is a clue to be discerned. Alright, and now, let's talk about it. Let's talk about what we were all pretty sure was coming at some point that had been rumored to be happening since we basically first learned Ahsoka was getting a show, that being the return of Hayden Christensen as Anakin Skywalker. Let's talk about the reunion between Snips and Sky Guy, even though, we're likely or hopefully going to be getting the bulk of it in the next episode, and this was only really a tease. In fact, I think basically half of next week's episode will be those two taking a sort of trip down memory lane, and maybe a little more than that. I think that some of the leaks and rumors, which I will not repeat here in case you don't want to know them, but I think they're looking pretty legit at this point, which could make for one hell of an episode next week. But getting back to the little bit we saw here, first of all, I do think that currently Ahsoka is indeed dead, hence she is in the world between worlds, and that would also explain why Anakin kind of said to her, "You're here sooner than expected." And as I've theorized elsewhere, and as Filoni has basically kind of said, this place is somewhere between the living force and the cosmic force, between life and death, you could say. And since Anakin was able to become a force ghost to keep his consciousness after death, the real him can indeed enter this place to speak with Ahsoka. As for how Anakin looked in terms of visual effects, well, he looked better than he did in the Kenobi series, I'll say that much. Still, if you want to get really nitpicky, he looked maybe slightly off. I don't know, could just be the setting made things tricky for them to bring to life. But honestly, I don't really care that much, just happy to see Hayden getting to reprise this role and to soon enough get a moment I think all us Clone Wars and Ahsoka fans have waited a long time for. That being her getting to speak with her former master after he has been redeemed. However, these trips down memory lane didn't exactly end there. We also got to see the ghost in this episode for the first time. Hera decided to defy orders and to take a few X-Wings with her to go and see if she could maybe help Sabine and Ahsoka, assuming there was trouble afoot. And among the pilots was Carson Teva, who we've seen quite a few times in The Mandalorian, and for reasons is a character I've really started to like. Maybe because he's one of the only New Republic members who doesn't seem completely useless or incompetent. The one character that maybe felt missing and like it would have been the perfect time and place to include him was Zeb. I thought this was a really good time for him to join the party, but maybe he's being held back for later. Maybe they don't want him in this too much because they don't want to animate him too much. Keeping in mind, I think he looked terrific in The Mandalorian, and it was probably a fairly expensive job on top of that. Either way, I do hope we see him at some point. I hope we get a full Ghost Crew reunion, minus Kanan, of course, who can't be there for obvious reasons. Either way, his son can be at that reunion, and speaking of Jason Syndulla, he got to say a variation of the famous bad feeling line. And I'm going to be very curious to see what Ezra has to say when he finally meets Jason for the first time and finds out his master had a son. I do wonder if he ends up training him eventually. Kind of feels like poetry, right? Kind of rhymes. Sticking with Hera and the few pilots or X-Wings that joined her, I was very, very curious how they'd handle the ring vessel jumping to hyperspace through them when it became obvious it was kind of going to happen. And it's interesting to note that Morgan didn't seem to fear her ship crashing into any of them and causing a catastrophe for all of them. Instead, unlike the Holdo maneuver, all that happened was in the ring ship's wake, and I'd imagine mainly because of all the power of the hyperdrive, it left essentially a nasty shockwave and a couple of X-Wings ended up crashing into each other. No more, no less. And though there's probably several things I'm forgetting to mention, this episode really did seem to be jam-packed full of stuff. I'm going to start to wrap this up by saying again how great of an episode this was. I am almost shocked at how good it was or how much I enjoyed it and how excited I am for next week and to see where this is all going. After a somewhat slow start, this episode was easily some of the best Star Wars of the Disney era. And I only hope it can keep that going into the back half and turn this whole series into something truly special. Which I do think it can. I'd be stunned if next week's episode with Anakin and Ahsoka reunion wasn't great. And I'm eager to see Thrawn and Ezra again, to see what's been going on with them. There is so much goodness to look forward to in this series, and I really hope they can stick the landing with this one and give us some more truly great Star Wars. Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you thought of this 4th episode of Ahsoka. Did you enjoy it as much as I did, or maybe even more? Or were you perhaps less impressed? And if so, why? Whatever the case may be, leave your comments below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.